Discover how a blind date with a janitor inspired 1,000 employees to reevaluate hidden values. As the toothless clock ticked past 7, Sarah Thompson felt every bit the invisible cog in a relentless machine. The Chicago skyline loomed outside her office window, all steel and glass, mocking her deepening sense of entrapment. Today, she drafted proposals and sat through endless meetings, yet her name barely skimmed the surface of the conversations, never to be followed by a nod of recognition. "You're talented, Sarah," her boss had said once. But that faded acknowledgement was buried under a mountain of corporate politics. It was her best friend's excitement about a blind date that pulled her from this suffocating spiral, even if only reluctantly. "It'll be fun," Jessica had insisted, her pep infectious despite Sarah's indifference. "You need a break from work." But as she sat in the local diner, waiting for the mystery man who would join her for dinner, anxiety twisted in her gut. Would she even be able to pretend to care about someone when her mind constantly looped back to spreadsheets and proposals? Her heart sank when he arrived, a janitor named Mike. Did relationship gymnastics require that she bridge the gap between her dreams and a man whose ambitions revolved around mopping floors? Yet Mike's easy laugh dismantled her reservations, his genuine curiosity peeling away layers of her exhaustion. Their conversation shifted from banal small talk to candid life stories, a warmth blossoming in the face of her established frustration. He didn't just clean the place, he aspired to design sustainable housing and tell stories with his art. The vibrant spark in his eyes stirred something within her, a longing she hadn't realized existed. "I have my family to support, but there's this dream." Mike's honest words felt like a lifeline. Awash in his passion, Sarah began to reframe her perspective. The corporate culture that glorified cutthroat ambition overlooked good people like Mike, the very foundation upon which creativity rested. She surprised herself with how her heart raced with outrage instead of cynicism. The janitorial staff kept the wheels of the firm turning, yet they sat in the shadows, unappreciated. Before the date concluded, Sarah felt the pressure building, an itch of restless resolve sparking inside her. What if these overlooked voices mattered? The next day would test her newfound courage. A crisis rattled the firm when layoffs became imminent. The chatter in the office shifted from projects to uncertainty and fear. Colleagues who quietly made the company run were now the casualties of a soulless spreadsheet. With the echo of Mike's dreams inside her, she felt compelled to confront the imbalance lurking in the shadows. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen." Now let's continue. The pressure tightened around her as she prepared for the board meeting. Doubt pulsed in her mind. What if they dismissed her concerns? What if she lost her job too? As she stared into a collective sea of disinterest, adrenaline surged. The stakes escalated when news broke that Mike, against all odds, would redesign the firm's flagship project, thrusting him into the rare spotlight where creativity flowed freely. Standing before the board, anxiety surged, mandating courage. She could either let the moment slip away or turn it into something more. The air grew thick with tension, shadows dancing on the walls, thick enough to cut. Would this be her moment? The lives of many were wrapped around her decision, and the question of whether she'd advocate for the very essence of what the firm claimed to celebrate haunted her. In that moment, she drew a deep breath and opened her mouth. A single moment of bravery could lead to profound change, or it might fade into a silence as cold as the steel walls around her. As the silencing pulse of impending silence echoed in her ears, Sarah quelled the storm of doubt that raged within. She grasped the edge of the podium, steadying herself amidst the unsettling gaze of the board. The room felt like a pressure cooker, her breaths shallow and quick as she balanced the weight of those countless hours spent in a cubicle, much like the invisible lives of her colleagues being threatened. "Let us focus on what truly defines us as a company," she started, her voice wavering slightly but gaining strength as she continued. The flicker of surprised eyes, few narrowing into skeptical lines, flickered across the room, but she persisted, emboldened by her encounter with Mike. It's not just profit margins and design rates. Our greatest asset is the people whose dedication keeps this firm running. For a heartbeat, time stood still, the air thickening with anticipation. She sensed the subtle shift in the room, from apprehension to scrutiny. There was no turning back. There are those among us whose efforts go unnoticed. The janitors, the maintenance staff, people like Mike, who bring invaluable skills and aspirations to the table, yet their talents remain hidden in the shadows. Her heart thudded hard, each beat a solemn reminder of what was at stake. A murmur cascaded through the board members, but Sarah pressed on. We are holding a mirror to our failures by prioritizing numbers over people. What if we allowed every voice to be heard, every contribution recognized? With each word, she sculpted her narrative, careful to position her concerns not solely as emotional appeals but as pragmatic strategies for sustainable growth. If they were to redefine their vision, it required a holistic approach. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere among the executives reminded Sarah of the obstacles ahead. She envisioned the sterile office corridors, the sterile conversations, but she also pictured the vitality Mike had breathed into her life, lighting up hopes she had suppressed in endless cycles of corporate jargon. In a time of crisis, we must unite rather than divide, she continued, conviction fortifying her stance. Implement a program to celebrate and acknowledge our unseen heroes. Imagine the impact on morale, productivity, and creativity. A silence enveloped the room, ripe with unspoken thoughts. Would they see the merit in her argument, or would she be discounted yet again? The chairman eyed her, a flicker of disbelief shadowing his features. We'll lose focus. Our priorities are elsewhere, he asserted, his tone sharp. It's about bottom lines, not feel-good campaigns. Perhaps that's the crux of our problem, Sarah countered, forcing each word through the knot of tension in her throat. We can only enforce a sustainable growth strategy if we acknowledge the individuals behind it. Neglecting the emotional investment of our team, whether they are on the front lines or behind the scenes, will only erode the very foundations we've built. The hush deepened. She wasn't merely advocating for a policy, she was proposing a profound shift in their corporate culture. Her heart raced, anticipating the pushback. Would her plea resonate, or would it dissolve amidst the suffocating indifference? Timeless values often get overlooked in the pursuit of profitability. But what if we disrupted that narrative? She added, daring to challenge the status quo. Voices murmured around her, wrestling with her words, the seeds of contemplation beginning to sprout. Could she really be the catalyst for change, or would the gravity of this world pull her back into obscurity? The boards may have been set, yet the outcome remained uncertain. With resolve coursing through her, Sarah knew there was no way to stand down. She had come this far, her voice might just ignite the spark needed to shatter the suffocating confines of their conventional thinking. But would they embrace this awakening or entrench themselves further in their antiquated mindsets? As the chairman prepared to respond, a subtle ripple of doubt flickered through her again. Did she have what it took to persevere against entrenched apathy, to push for a future where every voice truly mattered? In that defining moment, the tone of the room shifted once more, and she braced herself for the impact of the decisions that lay ahead. The moment of truth was upon her, but uncertainty loomed large. What lay in wait on the other side of this confrontation? The chairman's voice cut through the air, laced with a mixture of condescension and irritation. You misunderstand the essence of corporate leadership, Sarah. Numbers are not just figures, they're the foundation of our survival. The response settled over Sarah like a weight, but she clung to her conviction. The boardroom, a place she had always perceived as a fortress of privilege, was now a battlefield. She had crossed into enemy territory armed with something she realized was more powerful than mere data-human connection. I appreciate that, but numbers can't flourish without the pulse of the people behind them, she countered, a spark igniting within her as she spoke. Each rebuttal from the board drove Sarah deeper into a reflexive analysis of her own messaging. Did she showcase her vision clearly enough? It was one thing to speak about change, it was another to incite genuine belief among those who wielded power. As voices clashed amongst the executives, she observed their body language, the arms crossed defensively, brows furrowing in skepticism. Doubts crested again, but she inhaled sharply and gathered her thoughts. The urgency of the moment pervaded her system, and she remembered Mike's quiet strength, and how despite being invisible to many, his impact was undeniable. "Look around this table," she urged, her intensity rising. "In this very room are some remarkable talents, yet our prioritization of profits has eclipsed our human capital. Every financial decision we make reverberates through our employees' lives. We can't ignore the soul of this company." The chairman's brows knit together as he tilting his head, struck by a fleeting curiosity. Sarah sensed an opening. The tide might be shifting, however subtly. "We face pressing challenges, and if we don't engage our workforce wholly, we risk losing not just hearts, but minds as well. Imagine eroding creativity and morale. What will that do to our numbers in the long term?" Each word was clinical and calculated, transforming personal impact into articulations of business strategy. "Enough with the emotional diatribe," a voice interjected. Beth Morrison, the COO, who had long been a mouthpiece for the status quo. "While I appreciate your passion, we're here to make decisions based on performance metrics, not feel-good anecdotes." A pang of irritation shot through Sarah. This was more than just data, it was ethical. "I'm arguing for a fundamental shift, Beth. We can embed accountability into our culture while still acknowledging the humans who bring our innovations to life. It's sustainable leadership." Beth scoffed, but there was something shifting in the board's dynamic. The murmurs were now less focused on resistance and more curiosity. Sarah's pulse quickened. She had to leverage this moment. "What if we designed a small pilot program that draws attention to the efforts of our support staff? Let us test the efficacy of acknowledging every layer of our organization. If it fails, we're no worse off, but if it succeeds, we redefine engagement metrics in ways that resonate with our bottom line." A moment of silence stretched heavy across the room. Sarah felt the weight of every gaze, assessing, contemplating. Would this resonant idea, born from a simple conversation with a janitor, settle favorably in the corporate mindset? The chairman clenched his jaw, deliberating, or was he simply unwilling to budge? She caught the ball of frustration beginning to rise within her again and pressed forward with her plan, affirming each argument with an empirical basis, unearthing a resolve she had never known existed. As the meeting dragged on, she began to feel like their very foundation was waking, albeit slowly. Finding her voice, a voice unafraid of the implications of calling out systemic flaws, was liberating. Yet, fatiguing too, as she navigated the duality of her emerging confidence against the backdrop of possible rejection. "Let us vote on this proposal," Sarah urged, feeling the heat of anticipation. "A trial. If we are to move forward, we must do it with an open mind. The only constant in business is change." The board glanced sideways at one another, uncertainty still clinging to the air. As they prepared to cast their votes, her thoughts tumbled ahead. What if the backlash was fierce? What if rejection stifled her newfound boldness? An impulse surged. She wasn't here just for this vote, but for a broader transformation. She needed that bridge in her own self-worth too. She wanted to be a voice not just within these walls, but for the voiceless everywhere. As silence smothered the room, fraught with tension, Sarah braced for the impending decisions, a potential rise or plunge. The outcome teetered on the edge of an awakening. Could this be just the beginning of her fight for perspective and change? What lay hidden in the approval or denial of her proposal clung tightly to the air, weaving yet another layer into the fabric of her professional journey. Would they stand with her, or turn their backs once more? The moment stretched painfully long as the board cast their votes, the air heavy with expectation. Sarah's palms were clammy against the smooth surface of the boardroom table. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears, a relentless reminder of the delicate balance she had ventured to establish between vulnerability and assertiveness. Then the chairman broke the silence, his voice a measured tone that belied the internal turmoil she sensed beneath. "The vote is indifferent," he declared, glancing around the table, gauging reactions. We'll table your proposal for now, Sarah. It's not that we reject the core idea. We can agree that human capital is essential, but metrics, well, we can't overlook metrics. A wave of disappointment surged through Sarah, heavy and suffocating. Yet within the tumult of emotion was an undeniable spark of resolve. Indifference couldn't simply quash the fire she had ignited. They had shifted from knee-jerk resistance to cautious contemplation, and that, she acknowledged, was progress. In the follow-up days, however, indecision gnawed at her. Existing within the corporate cage of the familiar was both comfortable and constraining. She often replayed the board meeting in her mind, searching for weaknesses in her delivery, analyzing if any subtle shifts in tone could have tipped the scales in her favor. The critical thought spiraled: what strategy could she devise to rekindle the interest in her proposal? Would another approach reveal underlying interests beneath their professional facades? Faced with monotony in her daily tasks, Sarah sought guidance from a mentor outside of her company. She met Sarah Jordan, a former executive-turned-consultant known for shaking up corporate culture. The two women sat over coffee at a bustling cafe, the noise a cocoon around their conversation. "You need to recognize the power of storytelling," Sarah Jordan coaxed, leaning forward with intent. "You have a solid idea, but if they're not emotionally connected, it remains just another proposal." The weight of Sarah's previous encounters transparent on her face, she listened intently. "You're venturing into a space that requires more than data. It requires relatable human experiences." As they spoke, revelations unfolded like layers of an onion, each peel exposing deeper understanding. She realized she had been viewing her colleagues just as obstacles when they were also individuals with their own hopes and vulnerabilities. Empowered by this perspective, Sarah dove into crafting narratives that represented the unsung stories of her team. She conceptualized an initiative that revolved around capturing human moments, small victories, struggles, and connections. Her experience with Mike now transformed into a tapestry of voices that needed to be shared. Returning to her workplace the next week, she set up informal gatherings in the break room under the guise of a Share Your Story session. Inviting employees from various departments yielded a trove of personal narratives, illuminating the profound impact their roles had on the company. Each story felt like a brick, fortifying her campaign to reveal the invisible threads connecting the team. With each story, Sarah felt rejuvenated and her confidence swell. She was building a bridge that connected the human to the economic. There was a burgeoning community emerging, people resonating with one another in ways she never thought possible in a corporate environment. Despite the empowering experience, a shadow lingered at the edge of her success. She sensed the skepticism still present among the executives, particularly from Beth. Beth's unwavering commitment to traditionalism felt like an ever-looming threat, challenging every semblance of change Sarah inspired. As the days passed, anticipation grew for the next board meeting, and Sarah found herself wrestling with the potential for confrontation. The enthusiasm she had cultivated amongst her colleagues sparked questions of loyalty to a system resistant to change. Was she pushing too hard? Torn between the hope of acceptance and the fear of rejection, she questioned if she was destined to walk the knife's edge between innovation and adherence to the status quo. However, armed with burgeoning stories and renewed confidence, the time had come to present her findings. She would frame this not as mere anecdote but as justification for a pilot program that recognized and valued the workforce. Perhaps this was the moment to really confront Beth, to challenge not only the policies of the company but her own fears. As the shadows of the boardroom loomed before her once more, Sarah took a deep breath, ready to engage in a battle that felt less about winning and more about challenging the fundamental principles that had constrained her growth thus far. Would she be bold enough to face the impending confrontation, and could she transform the board once and for all? The boardroom loomed ahead, exuding an eerie calm, a stark contrast to the maelstrom swirling inside Sarah's mind. As she entered, the tension was palpable. Executives shuffled papers, aligning their meticulous notes in preparation. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't merely another presentation, it felt like a decisive confrontation that would dismantle her carefully curated world or reinforce it. She took her seat, scanning the faces around the table. Beth's posture was rigid, an unyielding fortress against the winds of change. But amid the tension, Sarah sensed the flickers of curiosity from other members. even if she detected an undercurrent of skepticism. This was her moment, not just for her proposal but for a personal transformation. With a deep breath, she began her presentation. Utilizing her newfound storytelling technique, Sarah narrated the touching stories she had gathered, each carefully woven into her message. She spoke of Mike, the janitor whose small acts of kindness had rippled through the workforce, igniting a camaraderie that numbers wouldn't capture. She illustrated how every story was a thread, weaving together the fabric of their company culture. Metrics may measure outputs, but they fail to encapsulate the heart of our organization, Sarah asserted, keeping her composure despite the electricity coursing through her veins. These narratives reveal a powerful truth: when employees see their humanity acknowledged, their work transforms. The metrics will come, but we must first nurture our people. As she finished her presentation, an unexpected silence followed. Sarah's heartbeat echoed loudly, the stark quiet amplifying her uncertainty. Would they resonate with her words, or would she face the withering reprimands of the traditionalists? Beth was the first to break the silence, her voice laced with skepticism. While these stories are compelling, they are, at their core, just anecdotes. The board requires data-driven proposals. Her gaze was sharp, immediately cutting through the vulnerability Sarah had just bared. Sarah felt a twinge in her chest, a mix of disappointment and fierce determination. This was the moment she had prepared for, a critical test of not just her proposal, but of her resolve to challenge the status quo. This was a chance to confront the policies that stifled growth and innovation, to dismantle the barriers built by rigid thinking. Beth, Sarah said, steadied by the supportive glances of her colleagues, these aren't just anecdotes. They reflect the lived experiences of our team, the very foundation of our productivity. The question is, how do we quantify the bonds that drive collaboration? Do we want a workplace that merely looks good on paper, or one that thrives on genuine connection? The tension in the room thickened as murmurs spread among the other board members, their expressions revealing a fight between their ingrained views and the emerging narratives. Sarah seized the moment. A shift in perspective was tangible. But this confrontation bore consequences. She could feel Beth's eyes narrowing, sharpening like daggers aimed directly at her. This would undoubtedly provoke resistance from an executive who felt threatened. As allies began to nod in agreement, Sarah sensed Beth's rising ire, a foe unwilling to bend. With adrenaline pulsating through her, Sarah laid out the next steps for a pilot program that included feedback mechanisms to ensure alignment with traditional metrics. The proposal now included quantifiable elements alongside the qualitative stories she had shared, creating a hybrid approach that might persuade even the most resistant. In that chaotic swirl of hope and fear, uncertainty loomed. Would this be her breakthrough moment or her breaking point? The air was thick with possibility. She had created a complex tapestry of human connection. Yet, the shadows cast by Beth's opposition loomed larger. As Sarah prepared to close, she understood that true transformation wasn't merely about one moment of confrontation but a continuum of opportunities to solidify her vision amidst adversity. She felt both excitement and tension spine through her, fully aware that the following responses could make or break her journey. But before she could address the board further, a buzzer echoed, signaling a timeout. To Sarah, it felt like a metaphorical stop, a moment of doubt creeping in once again. Could they challenge Beth's staunch beliefs, and in doing so, challenge their own reservations? The uncertainty left her hanging no resolution, only the anticipation of what would come next. And just then, as Beth prepared to respond, Sarah's phone vibrated, displaying a text from her mentor: "Stay true to your mission, confront the fears head-on. Change is often born in moments of discomfort." With that, Sarah faced the board again, the impending response tethering her to a new level of commitment, equally terrified and exhilarated to see what would unfold. What would Beth's retort unveil about the deeper divisions within the company, and could Sarah still hold her ground against the backlash swirling like a storm around her? The boardroom erupted almost immediately after the buzzer silenced the noise within. Sarah felt the mix of warmth and coldness that came with attention. It wrapped around her like a blanket, then quickly shifted into a noose. As Beth took her turn, poised and ready, Sarah braced herself. She had laid the groundwork, but would it hold? Beth's voice was steady, but the tension behind her words was tangible. While I appreciate Sarah's passion for storytelling, she prefaced, assessing the room with a sharp, calculating gaze, we must focus on results over narratives. Anecdotes cannot replace the rigor of the data-driven approach we've employed thus far. The numbers reflect our progress, and we cannot abandon them. Each tendency in Beth's argument hit like a drum, resonating with the fears of some board members. But to Sarah, this wasn't just a professional challenge, it felt deeply personal. What was her story worth if not enveloped in the support of hard facts? Her heart raced not in defeat but in recognition of the battle igniting within the walls of this conference room. Countering Beth's points, Sarah reiterated her plan with clarity and resolve. I'm not suggesting we abandon metrics entirely, but rather, diversify how we understand success. Additionally, embedding qualitative measures allows us to capture the essence of what truly drives engagement. Have we not seen, time and again, how productivity flourishes in an enriched workplace, one where employees feel valued? As the two executives sparred, Sarah's thoughts roamed beyond the boardroom, contemplating her own evolution. In voicing her certainty, she realized that this confrontation was more than about her proposal, it was about defining her professional identity. No longer a mere cog in the machine, she was becoming an architect of improvement, even if that journey came rife with discomfort. Each word was weighted with importance, shaping her not just as a worker but as a leader. As Beth prepared for a rebuttal, Sarah felt emboldened. Rather than back down in the face of competitive skepticism, she gathered her thoughts, planting seeds of self-discovery and strength. In that moment of clarity, she identified a hidden resource, one she hadn't fully acknowledged before: her ability to connect authentically with others. This realization fueled her momentum, transforming apprehension into potential. Every successful company evolves. Sarah directed her words not only to Beth but to the board as a whole. We are at a crossroads. Shall we cling to the familiar or dare to embrace a new narrative? We need to create a culture that recognizes the people before the profit. She paused, scanning the room. It was both a test and an invitation. Would they see the potential in her vision, or would they remain anchored in fear? Beth's demeanor shifted slightly, observing the stirring contributions from the other executives as they exchanged glances. Uncertainty flickered in their eyes, some nodded slightly, while others appeared to mull over Sarah's convictions. The atmosphere in the boardroom thickened, a palpable tension interwoven with the threads of uncertainty and curiosity. Whether she won them over or not, each heartbeat resonated with a passionate affirmation of her capabilities. Sarah knew she had grown through every awkward interaction, every nervous moment that had once consumed her. Despite facing Beth's palpable hostility, she felt achingly alive. The confrontation reached an undeniable height when Beth retorted, now visibly defensive. We can educate our employees about basic metrics, but your approach naively undervalues the intricacies of our accounting practices. Are we to choose sentiment over strategy? The exchange escalated. With every argument, every counterpoint Beth made, another piece of Sarah's resolve hardened. Beth was a formidable opponent, but Sarah had something that transcended Ben's data points. Her tenacity and commitment transformed into a formidable arsenal, and she felt that perhaps even her opponent could acknowledge the evolving landscape of what defined success. As the back and forth intensified, Sarah knew that this was not just a professional test but a personal revelation. She was learning to contest opposition, stand tall under scrutiny, and defend her values with fervor. Within these walls, the past echoes of doubt began to dissipate and were replaced by a burgeoning sense of empowerment, but the excitement was tempered with reflection. What was next? The backlash might provoke retaliatory measures or further restrictions. And as the dialogue continued to shift, she understood that the resolution might not be clear-cut. The challenges of confronting institutional rigidity would not vanish overnight. With a newfound resilience, Sarah took a deep breath, eager to usher in the next wave of discussion. Even amidst the uncertainty and the stakes laid bare before her, she sensed something simmering beneath the surface. Would her courage galvanize others, or would Beth stifle the change about to ignite? This exchange had already set the framework for what lay ahead. She quickly resolved to stand her ground against possible resistance but had to question if she was prepared for the consequences that came with defiance. A single thought flashed through her mind before she spoke again: change always calls for sacrifice. What would she be willing to lose in the name of progress? The dialogue had taken on a life of its own, swirling through the air like a charged electrical current. The board members were leaning in, captivated, sensing the raw energy radiating from both women. Sarah fought the urge to step back and disengage. This was her moment, a culmination of her journey from trepidation to determination. She glided her gaze over the faces before her, some intrigued, some skeptical, but all engaged in the unfolding drama. Let us consider working not just with the numbers, but the narratives they create, she pressed, her voice steadying as self-assurance flared within her. By placing a human experience at the forefront, we harness not just data, but the stories behind them, stories that can ignite a passion for our mission. But with each assertion, had she merely dug herself deeper into the figurative trench opposite Beth? The unease tangled within Sarah, wrestling between the thrill of her defiance and the dread of potential failure. Subconsciously, she fidgeted with her necklace, an old habit surfacing in moments of stress, grounding her back to reality. It was just a piece of jewelry, but today it represented resilience forged through trials of patience and persistence, Beth countered, her tone sharp. And how exactly do you plan to weave these narratives into our proven systems? Eloquence will not fill our bottom line. The unyielding fire in Beth's voice ignited a counter-surge within Sarah. She understood that confronting Beth wasn't merely a battle of opinions, it was a defining moment. It's not just about the bottom line, she declared, aiming the words like arrows at the heart of the issue. When employees see themselves represented, when they feel heard and valued, productivity rises as a natural byproduct. We're not just aiming for short-term gains, we are envisioning a sustainable future. For the first time since the argument had begun, a flicker of doubt crossed Beth's expression. This was an inflection point, one Sarah desperately wanted to capitalize on. She needed to push further. Imagine a company where employees leave work invigorated, discussing their accomplishments and dreaming up new ideas. That energy will translate directly to increased engagement and ultimately, profitability. Data can show this, but we must create the story that leads to it. The probability of winning over the others lingered right at the edge of Sarah's awareness. They were on the brink of a transformation, and she sensed the weight of the moment bearing down on all of them. Would they lean toward the familiar doctrine of data, or would they embrace the stirring promise of holistic success? The room simmered with tension, like a pot waiting to boil, but that wasn't all Sarah was fighting against. A deeper fear began to claw at her confidence, the fear of jeopardizing her position within the company. What if Beth, with her experience and connections, managed to turn the board against her? Could this backfire, ruin her career trajectory? Each potential outcome played out in her mind like a montage of worst-case scenarios, yet she was resolute in her stance. Change required both risk and resolve. Taking a breath, Sarah sought to regain control. This isn't just about our current model, it's about adaptability for the evolving workforce. Isn't it evident that the future market demands more than just hard metrics? To thrive, we must innovate our culture, or we risk stagnation. As she aimed her final words like a rallying cry, she noticed subtle nods of agreement from a few board members. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins, igniting hope. Would this be the turning point she had envisioned? Yet, even amidst burgeoning optimism, a nagging doubt remained. What if they only saw change as a threat? In the storm of doubts and revelations, pent-up anticipation hung thick in the air. The moment demanded clarity and purpose, a demand Sarah was more than willing to meet. Are we prepared to rethink what drives our success? She challenged, a spark igniting in her eyes, but just as she contemplated the unfolding possibilities, Beth straightened in her seat, leaning forward. Sarah's heart raced as the stakes heightened. The time has come to face the uncomfortable truths about change and the real power that it demands. The boardroom exhaled a collective breath, ready to delve into the consequences of their decisions. Would Sarah's vision prevail, or would they retreat into the comfort of the status quo? The result hinged on the very essence of what they were willing to sacrifice. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted palpably as Beth began her counterattack. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline surging through her. This was no longer merely a debate, it was a wrestling match of ideologies, each thrust and parry revealing deeper convictions. Beth leaned forward, her demeanor focused, almost predatory. You speak of narratives and human connection, but what about accountability? What about the hard numbers that drive us forward? Her voice cut through the air, sharp as glass, echoing the concerns of a seasoned executive who had spent years mastering the transactional nature of their industry. Sarah squared her shoulders, grappling with the moment's intensity. The urge to retreat and hide behind the bulwark of data was strong. Yet, she felt the ember of determination flickering in her chest. This wasn't just about numbers. It was about a vision she had nurtured, one that promised to bridge the gap between profit and purpose. Accountability is essential, Sarah replied, her voice steady now, catalyzed by conviction. But we cannot achieve it without trust. Trust is fostered through an environment where employees feel seen and valued. Our best outcomes will come not from fear of failure, but from the freedom to innovate and experiment. She watched as several board members exchanged glances. The space crackled with tension, but there were signs of fracture in Beth's fortress. Still, Sarah knew she had to press on. What if we instituted programs that paired employees from different levels across the organization? Sarah suggested, her mind racing ahead. Imagine a month where each employee had a chance to share their stories regardless of their role. You want data? Let us collect feedback on how these conversations improve collaboration and morale. It could be our catalyst for change. A flicker of intrigue sparked on one of the board members' faces. That was progress, albeit small. But as the seconds ticked away, anxiety crept in again. What if her ideas weren't robust enough to withstand the scrutiny they would surely face? What if she had just unleashed an even greater wave of challenges? A moment of clarity struck. Sarah remembered mentorship programs she had participated in earlier in her career. They had shown her how vulnerable narratives could unlock potential and camaraderie among unlikely allies. It was time to invoke that power, wield it like a weapon. It's like a blind date, she began, her voice carrying a lighter tone. Employees connecting with each other beyond their roles, finding common ground unexpectedly. The janitor who shares a story with the head of finance, or the project manager helping the intern feel seen. We lower the walls that segregate us with human encounters, elevating the entire culture of our company. The metaphor settled heavily on the crowd, murmurs rising as she cultivated a vision that was both whimsical and profound. Yet, Beth wasn't done. That's all well and good, but what happens if it fails? Risks pose potential fallout for all of us here. You're asking for a leap of faith. I'm asking us to embrace the possibility of failure as part of our evolution. Sarah shot back, emboldened with passion. What are we if we refuse to adapt? The greatest companies in history have transformed themselves by facing risks, not sidestepping them. Silence stretched taut across the room as the members pondered her words. In their eyes, she could see hesitation beginning to give way to consideration. Had she created a fissure in their reliance on cold, hard data, fueled by the energy in the room? Sarah seized the moment. Let us take this leap together. Can we commit to a pilot project, an experiment where we intertwine narratives with our operational framework? The very fabric of our work culture will depend on it. As she finished, the board members shifted in their seats, some visibly intrigued, others still apprehensive. But she knew a pivotal shift was occurring. She had turned the tide ever so slightly in her favor, but just as she felt the ground beneath her solidify, Randall, one of the more seasoned analysts, spoke up. And if we fail at this project? What does that mean for each of us? His question hung heavily in the air. Anxiety swirled within her, threading uncertainty through the fabric of the vision she had presented. Failure is not the end point, but a learning process, Sarah attempted to reply, her heart pounding. Each misstep can illuminate what needs adjusting, what values must be uplifted, or who we need to involve. We keep our focus not just on success, but on understanding. That is the ultimate power behind our mission. The moment stretched on, her words dangling in the atmosphere like a beacon. She was all too aware that whatever happened next could solidify her place in the company or unravel it completely. In that instant, choices hung in the balance, and she felt the weight of every gaze upon her. Would they be willing to venture beyond the familiar? She exhaled slowly, knowing the next words out of her mouth could change everything. Will we come together to reshape our future, or will we allow fear to lock us into the past? Her heart raced as she awaited their response, a raw awareness dawning this wasn't just a battle for her ideas, it was a pivotal moment for her future quality of life and professional integrity. And in that charged silence, she couldn't help but wonder, would she still believe in her vision if no one else did? The quiet lingered, thick and suffocating, until slowly, the board members began to murmur amongst themselves. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the precariousness of the moment. She was at the precipice of change, failure felt more tangible than ever. Yet, the earnestness in her mind bolstered her resolve, compelling her to maintain eye contact with the group, searching for signs of support among the skeptical faces. Finally, it was Margaret, an experienced board member known for her tact, who broke the silence. It's an interesting concept, Sarah, this idea of fostering connections. How do you plan to manage the inevitable resistance from upper management? We do have our skeptics. Her tone was delicately probing, encouraging yet daunting. In that instant, Sarah recognized the opening she had been waiting for, a chance to recalibrate her approach. Resistance is natural, she acknowledged, her mind whirling with strategies. But we can approach it with transparency. If we clearly communicate our goals and invite leaders to be part of something bigger than themselves, we can integrate their feedback into the process. It's essential that they see their value in this initiative. We could also involve them in designing the pilot project, ensuring they feel ownership. The nods of a few board members encouraged her to delve deeper. Additionally, I suggest establishing small focus groups right at the outset. This would provide initial insights and give everyone an early stake in the project. It allows their voices to be heard before the larger-scale implementation. Smart strategy, another member, Fisher, chimed in. Testing waters before diving in. But what is your specific metric for success? You need to demonstrate tangible outcomes to the board. The question struck Sarah harder than she anticipated. She realized she hadn't fully fleshed out the concrete measurements that would accompany her vision. Would feedback and connection really translate into quantifiable success? Right, she murmured, rallying her scattered thoughts. We could track employee engagement scores, increased collaboration across departments, and, ideally, performance metrics post-pilot. Gathering data before and after would allow us to compare and iterate continuously. We'll need to embrace an adaptive process. Beth remained quiet, a shadow hovering over her expression that suggested disapproval, yet Sarah couldn't ignore the faint glimmer of curiosity in her eyes. Perhaps she, too, recognized the potential of Sarah's vision transforming the rigid company ethos. All right, then, Beth interjected smoothly, her tone sliding into business-like practicality. If we were to entertain your proposal for a pilot program, what timeline are you thinking? A wave of relief washed over Sarah, the ground beneath her feet stabilizing. I propose a 3-month pilot, starting with our most hesitant departments. This gives us time to gather data and make iterations before broader implementation. With every exchange, Sarah felt a newfound sense of empowerment buoying her confidence as the chatter around her became more animated. Each step forward felt like sabotage giving way to resilience. She was no longer just defending her position, she was a fierce advocate for a new narrative, but as enthusiasm bubbled, the underlying trepidation didn't vanish. The fear of being rendered vulnerable loomed, especially as she realized that for this to work, she had to wholly invest herself in nurturing these connections. She blinked, focusing on Beth, who seemed to be processing this unexpected vigor. And Sarah, Beth interjected, tone shifting. If this fails, accountability must lie with you. So, can you assure us you're prepared to take responsibility for this project, should it falter? The question pierced through her bravado, and an unsettling doubt momentarily clouded her vision. This wasn't just about her ideas anymore, it was about her capacity to lead effectively, both in success and downfall. Absolutely, I'm ready, Sarah replied, the fervor she felt morphing into a deeper commitment. Then, whether it succeeds or fails, I'll champion the lessons learned. As the board members absorbed her confidence, new discussions ignited among them. Hope radiated through Sarah, mingling with fear the recognition that this leap had become more than just a concept, it was an exploration of her own limits and capabilities, but as she entertained thoughts of success, the haunting image of failure still skulked in corners of her mind. What if her commitment led to her undoing? Would she be able to face the aftermath if it didn't unravel as planned? With determination coursing through her, Sarah prepared to navigate this intricate balance of ambition and anxiety, aware that her real trial had just begun. Would she rise to the challenge of leading with vulnerable courage, or would the pressure unravel all she had fought for? As Sarah stared at the board members, she felt the weight of her words linger like a tape measure stretching towards a resolution. The collective gaze held a mix of skepticism and intrigue as they mulled over the pilot program she had proposed. In her mind, the stakes were sky-high, but the commitment to transforming the company culture had ignited a fire within her. Days turned into weeks, and during the pilot program, anticipation bloomed across departments. Employees from varying levels engaged with each other, sharing personal stories that ultimately brought middle management and the janitorial staff together. Each story echoed in Sarah's mind like a melody that couldn't be forgotten. The cross-pollination of ideas forged unity, much like she had envisioned. Through daily discussions, intentional collaborations emerged, and the walls that enclosed the silos of their corporate structure began to crumble. The feedback from the pilot program flowed in and surely reflected greater engagement levels and measurable productivity. Sarah's heart rhythmically matched the newfound beat of the team's collective enthusiasm. Each day brought her growth, a renewed confidence blossoming within her as she navigated the complexities of leadership. Meeting after meeting, she heard her peers refer to the initiative as the Human Experience Campaign with a sense of pride that reverberated. The human touch, they called it, words that hinted at a deep connection she had always craved to foster. Acknowledgement poured in from not only employees but also executives who had been resistant from the start. A mid-cycle review confirmed that many metrics were tracking upward. The areas where storytelling had enhanced collaboration now yielded higher performance ratings. And then came that moment. It was fraught with anticipation when the feedback report was presented at the next board meeting. Nervous yet resolute, Sarah stood before the table of executives, sweeping her gaze across the faces that had once dismissed her ideas. She was no longer just the unseen cog, she had become a leader weaving visions into reality. The numbers don't lie, she began confidently. Our Human Experience Campaign has stirred emotions that propel creativity. The ripple effect of increased morale is producing quantifiable results. We can maintain our bottom line while genuinely investing in our people. As she laid out the data from the pilot program, glassy-eyed looks shifted into glimmers of acknowledgement. The culture was flourishing, fostering an appetite for transformation that Sarah had long desired to see. Beth, no longer an unyielding obstacle, nodded slowly as the realization sank in that this approach was tangible and beneficial, a shift in paradigm that was more than just a passing whim. I must admit, Sarah, the reports reflect a tangible influence, she complimented, still measured but far more open now. The data backs your narrative. What's next? As the board discussed the next steps, a swell of pride rushed through Sarah. This was a moment of recognition, solidifying her competence. She had proven that leadership could be rooted in humanity, that valuing employees extended beyond mere rhetoric. The meeting concluded with plans to scale the initiative further, a company-wide rollout that would embed the lessons learned into the very fabric of the organizational culture. Sarah felt a potent surge of satisfaction as she walked out, no longer just a voice, but an acknowledged leader capable of pioneering a new approach. Her journey had transformed her from a passive participant into an empowering architect of change within the organization. She didn't just gain recognition from her peers and executives, she discovered an innate reservoir of strength and conviction that she had suppressed for far too long. In the months that followed, Sarah continued to guide the storytelling initiative, each narrative enriching the tapestry of the firm. Days were busy, meetings frequent, but she awoke each morning with a sense of purpose, ready to sculpt a workplace where every individual felt valued. It was Mike's initial influence that had sparked this transformation. The blind date with a janitor had ignited change, a realization that every story mattered, including hers. She had achieved what she once thought impossible. The sense of fulfillment was deep and abiding. Not only had she impacted the trajectory of the company's culture, but she had also rekindled relationships and values within herself that she had buried in self-doubt. Exiting an executive conference just days ago, she caught her breath on the balcony that overlooked the Chicago skyline. It wasn't just the city's vastness that expanded before her, it represented the possibilities now open to her, a skyline that reflected soaring ambitions combined with profound human connection. Sarah no longer felt like an invisible cog. She had ascended to a recognized leader, a woman who championed the overlooked, weaving their stories into the fabric of success. Consistent gratitude and acknowledgement flowed from every level, fostering a vibrant culture that began honoring the unseen heroes of their workforce, like Mike, and at that moment, surveying what she had built, she reveled in the understanding that her journey was only just beginning. This felt like a victory, a defining moment of authenticity long denied, and a commitment to never again allow herself to be unseen. But she wasn't simply stopping here. This experience had ignited a fire within her to continue advocating for those without a voice. The world needed more stories of resilience, and Sarah was more than ready to embrace the challenge of using her own to transform more than just her immediate surroundings. Now, as we shift our focus back to you, the audience who has journeyed alongside these characters in their challenges and transformations. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm, comment your reactions and theories about this riveting conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this empowering finale. You need to subscribe now. True fans of personal overcoming stories understand the urgency to support this channel. Don't wait even one more second to share. Your voice counts.